Welcome back, fellow explorers of history's often shadowed pathways. Tonight, we set our sights on an island at the edge of what was once a vast empire. An island suddenly cut loose from its moorings and plunged into an era of profound transformation, turmoil, and terrifying uncertainty. We're talking about Britain after the Romans packed up their standards and sailed away, the period often dramatically, if sometimes inaccurately, dubbed the Dark Ages. Forget the gleaming marble of Rome for a moment. We're about to step into a world of crumbling villas, encroaching forests, flickering hearth fires and timber halls, and the ever-present threat of the unknown. What was life really like for the people left behind? This is our quest to uncover what was life in Dark Age Britain really like. But hold your horses, or perhaps your rudimentary coracles, before we wade into the misty fens and fortified hillforts of post-Roman Britain. If this is the kind of historical deep dive that stirs your imagination, please do consider hitting that subscribe button to join our community of history adventurers. It truly helps us chart these often overlooked territories of the past. And as we embark on this new series, I'd be absolutely thrilled if you drop a comment below letting us know what country you're watching from. It's always incredible to see our global fellowship tuning in. Plus, I'm constantly on the lookout for our next foray into times of trial. So tell me, what other historical roles, civilizations, or unfortunate predicaments do you think deserve to be with us in next nights? I'm always on the lookout for new avenues of historical misery to explore. So please, share your ideas and suggestions in the comments below. I read every single one. Right then, the last Roman galley has disappeared over the gray horizon. Its eagle standard of fading glint. Silence descends, heavy and pregnant with an unknown future. Imagine you are living in a small settlement somewhere in the land that, for nearly 400 years, has been known as Britannia, a province, albeit a somewhat remote and occasionally troublesome one of the mighty Roman Empire. Your parents, your grandparents, perhaps even their grandparents, had known a world shaped by Roman order. Straight, paved roads connected towns fortified with stone walls. Villas, with their heated floors and colorful mosaics, dotted the countryside, centers of agricultural estates. A common language, Latin, at least among the administrators, the traders, and the educated, overlaid the native Brythonic Celtic tongues. Roman law, however harshly applied at times, provided a framework. Roman legions, even if their numbers had dwindled, represented a shield against the barbarians to the north and the sea raiders from beyond. Then, it all changes. The news, trickling in through traders or frantic messengers, is dire. The empire is crumbling, beset by enemies on all fronts. The legions are needed elsewhere to defend Rome itself, or the vital frontiers of Gaul and the Rhine. Around the year we now call 410 AD, the Emperor Honorius, so the chronicles tell us, sends a fateful rescript to the civitates, the administrative districts of Britain. Look to your own defenses. It is a polite, imperial way of saying, you are on your own now. We are not coming back. The lifeline that connected Britain to the vast, sophisticated, and for all its flaws, relatively stable world of Rome is decisively, irrevocably cut. What does this mean for you? A farmer tilling your fields, a craftsman in a decaying town, a woman trying to raise a family amidst growing uncertainty? It means, first and foremost, a terrifying power vacuum. The Roman governors, the magistrates, the tax collectors, the entire administrative machinery that underpins society, they depart, or their authority simply dissolves. Who now enforces the law? Who collects the taxes, though perhaps their absence is initially a relief? Who maintains those vital roads and bridges? Who organizes a unified defense when danger threatens? The visible signs of decay are everywhere. Those magnificent Roman roads, once buzzing with legionaries, merchants, and imperial couriers, begin to crack and crumble. Weeds sprout between the paving stones. Bridges collapse and are not repaired, forcing dangerous fords or lengthy detours. The grand stone villas, once symbols of wealth and Romanized living, become vulnerable targets. Some are fortified with crude earthworks by their desperate owners. Many more are simply abandoned, their owners perhaps fleeing to the relative safety of walled towns, or even trying to escape Britain altogether. You might see their mosaic floors crack under winter frosts, their painted wall plaster peel and fall, their once manicured gardens revert to wilderness. The silence that falls over these empty, decaying shells is a chilling testament to a world ending. The towns themselves, places like Londinium, Eboracum, or Verulamium, begin to shrink. Their forums fall silent, their basilicas crumble, their bathhouses, once centers of social life, grow cold and are stripped of their lead piping and valuable materials. People huddle in smaller, more defensible sections, perhaps within the old Roman walls, but even these are often too extensive to be properly manned. Trade with the continent, once the lifeblood of these urban centers, dwindles to a trickle. Coinage, the Roman currency that facilitated complex economic transactions, becomes increasingly scarce. You revert to barter, to a more localized, subsistence-based economy. Specialized crafts that relied on wider markets, fine pottery, intricate metalwork, glassmaking, decline sharply. Life becomes more rudimentary, more focused on the immediate, desperate needs of survival. In the countryside, where you perhaps live in a small village of timber and thatch huts, the change is marked by the rise of local strongmen. With no central authority, power falls to whoever can seize it and hold it. This might be a Romano-British aristocrat with a well-armed band of retainers, a re-emergent Celtic chieftain reasserting ancient tribal loyalties, or simply a ruthless warrior carving out a petty kingdom for himself. These are your new rulers, their laws, often arbitrary, their protection fickle, their demands for tribute or service relentless. The landscape becomes a patchwork of tiny, feuding territories, a far cry from the unified province of Britannia, and the threats from outside only intensify. The Picts and Scots from the north, no longer held in check by Roman frontier defenses, like Hadrian's Wall, now largely unmanned and decaying, sweep down in brutal raids, plundering, burning, and carrying off captives. From the west, across the Irish Sea, the Scoti, the Irish, intensify their own seaborne attacks, their currachs appearing like wolves in coastal settlements and up navigable rivers. But it is from the east, across the gray North Sea, that the most ominous shadow falls. Germanic peoples, Angles, Saxons, Jutes, their numbers seemingly endless, their longships sleek and menacing, begin to arrive in greater force. Initially, some may have come as foederati, mercenaries hired by desperate British warlords to fight against other raiders, or even against rival British factions. But soon, these mercenaries see the weakness, the fragmentation, the richness of the land, and they begin to look not for pay, but for plunder, and then for land to settle themselves. The very defenders you might have hired become your dispossessors. You live in a state of constant, low-level dread. Every unfamiliar sail on the horizon, every rumor of a village sacked further down the coast, every unexplained pillar of smoke in the distance sends a fresh wave of terror through your community. The old certainties are gone. The Roman peace, the Pax Romana, is a fading, almost mythical memory. You are standing on the threshold of a new, far darker, and profoundly more dangerous age, an age where survival itself will be a daily, desperate struggle. The lights of Rome have been extinguished, and the shadows are growing ever longer, filled with the glint of unfamiliar steel and the echoes of alien war cries. The Roman eagles have well and truly flown, their comforting shadow replaced by an unnerving, exposed vulnerability. You, the Romano-Briton or Celtic Briton, are adrift in a sea of rising uncertainty, where local warlords squabble over the decaying remnants of imperial power. The raids from the Picts of the north and the Scoti of Ireland are a known, if brutal, quantity. But now, from the east, across the gray, churning waters of the North Sea, a new and far more relentless tide begins to wash upon your shores, a tide of Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. These are not just fleeting plunderers. These are peoples on the move, seeking not just treasure, but land, a new home, your home.at first. Perhaps they arrived in smaller war bands, their long, shallow draft ships nosing into the estuaries and river mouths of the eastern and southern coasts. They might have initially served as foederati, mercenaries hired by desperate British chieftains to fight against other raiders or even rival British factions, paid in land and provisions. You might have looked upon these tall, fair-haired, fiercely bearded warriors with a mixture of fear and reluctant respect, their strange, guttural tongue alien to your ears, their pagan gods a source of deep unease. But their fighting prowess was undeniable. However, the defenders soon become the invaders. They see the richness of the land, the fertile river valleys, the decaying but still potentially useful Roman towns. They see the political fragmentation of Britannia, the inability of the squabbling British kings and warlords to mount a unified resistance. And they begin to come not in trickles, but in waves, bringing their families, their livestock, their household goods, their ambition. This is no longer a series of raids. It is a migration, an invasion, a slow, relentless, and often brutal supplanting of one people by another. If you live in the eastern or southern parts of what was once Britannia, your life becomes a desperate struggle for survival. The newcomers, whom your people might call the Sais or Season, Saxons, are hungry for land. They are warriors, their culture steeped in a martial tradition, their gods demanding sacrifice and celebrating battle prowess. The peace of your village is shattered by the sudden shriek of their war cries, the glint of their long knives, seaxes, and broad-bladed spears. Skirmishes, ambushes, and outright battles become terrifyingly frequent. Your local British chieftain, for all his bluster, might be no match for their ferocity or their numbers. You see your world literally going up in flames. Villages are sacked, their timber huts and thatched roofs burning like funeral pyres against the night sky. Crops are seized, livestock driven off. Those who resist are often cut down without mercy. Men, women, children. Others are taken as slaves, the wheels, foreigners, or Welsh, as the newcomers call your people, forced to serve these new masters in the very fields their ancestors once tilled. The stories of atrocities, of massacres, of desperate last stands in ancient hill forts filter through the terrified countryside. The remnants of Roman Britain in these areas are systematically erased or repurposed. Roman towns, already decaying, are often avoided by the early Anglo-Saxon settlers who prefer a more rural existence, their timber halls built amidst open fields. If towns are occupied, their stone buildings are often left to crumble, their streets becoming muddy tracks. Roman villas, those symbols of a lost, sophisticated age, are looted, burned, or their stones carted away to build the foundations of new, cruder dwellings. The very landscape begins to change, reflecting the culture of its new inhabitants. Forests, once cleared by Roman agriculture, might begin to reclaim the fields as populations shift and farming techniques alter. For you, the Briton, this means displacement, a desperate flight westward or northward, away from the advancing tide. You become a refugee in your own land, seeking sanctuary in the still British-controlled territories of the West, in what will eventually become Wales and Cornwall, or in the rugged, mountainous north. Or perhaps you join the exodus across the sea to Armorica in Gaul, which will soon become known as Brittany, Little Britain, a new homeland for a dispossessed people. This journey is one of immense hardship, undertaken with whatever meager possessions you can carry, constantly looking over your shoulder, harried by hunger, disease, and the ever-present threat of encountering another Saxon warband, the Old Roman. Coastal defenses, the forts of the Saxon shore, once designed to protect Britannia from these very peoples, are now either abandoned ruins, overrun, or perhaps grimly held by desperate British warriors in a futile attempt to stem the flood. The sense of order, of belonging to a larger, civilized world, is utterly shattered. Your identity as a Romano-Briton is being forcibly erased, replaced by the brutal reality of being a foreigner in your ancestral lands. Of course, the Britons do not go quietly. There is resistance. Local warlords, figures who might later be mythologized into heroes like the legendary Arthur, rise to lead their people in battle. For periods, the tide of Anglo-Saxon advance is halted, even pushed back. Victories are won, perhaps at places like Mount Badon, buying precious decades of respite for some British kingdoms. But the pressure is relentless. The newcomers keep arriving, their hunger for land insatiable. The internal divisions among the British kings themselves often prevent a unified, effective, long-term defense, so your world becomes one of constant, low-intensity warfare, of shifting frontiers, of raided farms and burned churches. The intricate social structures of Roman Britain collapse, replaced by a simpler, harsher, more tribal existence, whether under British warlords or new Saxon chieftains. Literacy declines, specialized crafts are lost, and life becomes more localized, more brutal, more focused on the stark necessities of food, shelter, and defense. You are living through the violent birth pangs of new kingdoms, the slow, agonizing death of your own world, and the terrifying uncertainty of what will rise from its ashes. And the long knives of the Saxons cast an ever-lengthening shadow across the land. The long ships of the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes have carved their way into the estuaries and rivers of your land. Their warriors no longer just fleeting nightmares, but a permanent, aggressive presence. Large swathes of what was once Roman Britannia are now under their sway, or are fiercely contested battlegrounds. If you are a Briton, your world has been irrevocably fractured. You might be a refugee, pushed into the wilder, hillier terrains of the West and North, clinging to the remnants of your culture and your freedom. Or perhaps you are one of the subjugated, a well in your own ancestral lands, now toiling under the harsh rule of a new Germanic lord. Even if you live in a still independent British kingdom, the threat from these newcomers, and indeed from rival British warlords, is constant and pervasive. Life has become a grim, daily struggle for survival in a land where the old order is dead and the new one is forged in fire and blood. Forget the ordered towns and stone-built villas of the Roman past. Your new dwelling, whether you are a Briton holding out or an early Anglo-Saxon settler, is likely a much simpler, cruder affair, built for defense and basic shelter rather than comfort or elegance. Imagine a small village, perhaps nestled in a forest clearing or a river valley, surrounded by a hastily erected wooden palisade or an earthwork topped with sharpened stakes. This is your primary defense against raiders, wolves, and the ever-present threat of rival war bands. Inside this defended perimeter, life centers around the timber hall of your local chieftain or lord, or, if you are a simple farming family, your own humble dwelling. This might be a rectangular wooden longhouse, its walls made of rough-hewn planks or wattle and daub, its roof thatched with reeds or straw. It's a dark, smoky space, with a central hearth fire pit in the middle of the packed earth floor. The smoke is supposed to escape through a hole in the roof, but much of it lingers, stinging your eyes, coating everything with a layer of soot, and leaving your clothes and hair perpetually smelling of wood smoke. During the harsh winters, you might share this cramped, smoky space not just with your extended family, but also with your precious livestock, a cow, a few sheep or goats, some chickens. Their warmth, a welcome addition. Their smell, just another part of the domestic aroma. Alternatively, especially if you are an Anglo-Saxon settler, you might live in a Grubenhaus, a sunken featured building, its floor dug a few feet into the ground, perhaps to provide extra insulation, or a solid base for a loom if it's used as a workshop. These are small, cramped, and equally smoky structures. The grandeur of Roman mosaics and painted frescoes is a forgotten dream. Your world is one of rough timber, damp earth, and flickering firelight. Your days are governed by the relentless rhythm of subsistence agriculture. You clear land with iron-tipped axes and primitive plows, perhaps a light ard that only scratches the surface of the soil, drawn by a pair of oxen if you are fortunate, or by your own back-breaking human effort. If you are not, you sow hardy grains like barley, oats, and perhaps some spelt or rye. Wheat is less common, reserved for better soils or the Lord's fields. You cultivate small plots of vegetables, beans, peas, cabbages, onions, leeks, the same humble fare that sustained Roman peasants, now grown in a far more insecure world. Every member of your family, from the youngest child capable of scaring birds from the crops to the oldest woman bent over a weeding hoe, contributes to this endless toil. A failed harvest, due to drought, flood, or the ravages of war, means not just hardship, but the very real prospect of starvation. The old Roman trade networks that brought pottery, wine, and other goods from across the empire have collapsed. Your community is now largely self-sufficient, out of grim necessity. You wear clothes made from homespun wool, shorn from your own sheep, spun into yarn by the women of your household, and woven on simple, upright looms. Your pottery is crude, locally made, functional rather than decorative. Your tools, knives, axe heads, spear points, are forged by the local smith. If your village is large enough to support one, their quality variable, their metal precious. Salt, essential for preserving what little meat you might acquire, is a valuable commodity, perhaps traded from coastal regions or painstakingly extracted from brine springs. Law and order, as the Romans understood it, is a distant memory. In its place is a system of customary law, loyalty to your kin group, and your local lord being paramount. If you are wronged, if your property is stolen, if a member of your family is injured or killed, you look not to a distant magistrate, but to your own kin and your lord for justice. This often means the blood feud, a cycle of vengeance and counter-vengeance between families or tribes that can simmer for generations, erupting periodically in violence. Or perhaps justice is sought through the payment of wergild, the man price, a complex system of compensation paid to the victim or their kin to avert further bloodshed, its value determined by the social status of the injured party. For some accusations, your guilt or innocence might be determined by trial by ordeal, plunging your arm into boiling water, carrying a red-hot iron, or being thrown bound into a sacred pool. If you heal cleanly, or if you float, God has proclaimed your innocence. If not, well, God has spoken otherwise. It's a terrifyingly arbitrary system, far removed from the reasoned, if often corrupt, courts of Roman Britain. Life is lived constantly on edge. The threat of a raid is never far away. A lookout might be posted, a horn sounded at the first sign of danger. Every able-bodied man is, by necessity, a warrior, ready to grab his spear, his shield, his axe, to defend his home and family. Childhood is short. Boys learn to wield weapons almost as soon as they can walk, and girls learn the harsh realities of managing a household in a world where their menfolk might not return from a skirmish. Death is a familiar companion, whether from violence, disease, or the gnawing hunger of a lean winter. And what of your inner world, your beliefs? If you are a Briton, you likely cling to your Christian faith, though it is now a faith under siege, its organization fractured, its priests perhaps hunted in areas controlled by the pagan Anglo-Saxons. Monasteries, often in remote, defensible locations, become vital centers of learning, faith, and refuge, preserving the flickering candle of Roman and Christian tradition. If you are one of the Anglo-Saxon newcomers, you bring your own gods: Woden, the All-Father; Thunir, the Thunderer; Tiw, the one-handed god of war. Their worship involving sacrifice, divination, and a belief in a warrior's afterlife in the halls of Valhalla. The landscape itself becomes imbued with these beliefs: sacred groves, wells, and hilltops holding a potent spiritual significance. This clash, or sometimes uneasy coexistence, of faiths adds another layer of complexity and potential conflict to your already precarious life. This is your world now, a place of timber and thatch, of iron and blood, of hard toil and constant vigilance, where survival is a daily triumph and the echoes of a fallen empire are fading into the encroaching darkness that you found your place, however precarious, in this new, fragmented Britain. Your days are a relentless cycle of toil within the smoky confines of a timber hall or a sunken hut, your belly often half empty, your mind perpetually alert to the threat of violence from rival war bands or opportunistic raiders. The old Roman certainties are gone, replaced by a harsher, more localized existence where survival is a daily, hard-won victory. But beyond the external threats of hunger and the sword, there is an insidious, ever-present enemy that stalks your dark age life: the frailty of your own body and the terrifying inadequacy of any means to mend it when it breaks or sickens. In this era, good health is a fleeting, precious gift, not a reasonable expectation. The very conditions of your life conspire against it. Imagine the sanitation, or rather, the utter lack thereof. You live in close quarters with your family, and often your animals, especially during the long, cold winters. Waste disposal is rudimentary: a midden heap outside your dwelling, a shared latrine pit if your settlement is more organized, but often just the nearest patch of ground. Clean drinking water, as we've touched upon in other contexts, is a constant gamble, streams and wells easily contaminated by human and animal refuse. Flies and other vermin are constant companions, flitting between the dung heap and your meager bowl of pottage. Is it any wonder that diseases we now consider minor or easily treatable were rampant and often deadly? The flux, dysentery, is a common scourge, sweeping through communities, leaving its victims weakened, dehydrated, and often dead, especially the very young and the old. Fevers of unknown origin, agues that rack your body with alternating chills and sweats, are a frequent occurrence. Skin infections, boils, carbuncles, and weeping sores are an accepted part of life, often resulting from minor cuts or insect bites that, in the absence of effective antiseptics, quickly become dangerously infected. Respiratory ailments, exacerbated by the smoky, damp conditions inside your dwellings, claim countless lives each winter. What happens when you fall ill? Forget the learned physicians with their scrolls of Hippocrates and Galen that once graced Roman towns. Much of that sophisticated medical knowledge, for what it was worth, has either vanished with the Romans or retreated into the scriptoria of isolated monasteries, largely inaccessible to you, the ordinary person. Your first line of defense is folk medicine, a mixture of inherited herbal wisdom, practical experience, and a heavy dose of superstition, often administered by a local, wise woman or an elder in your community. She might come to your bedside, her face etched with a mixture of concern and ancient knowledge, bearing a pouch of dried herbs. For a fever, perhaps a willow bark infusion containing salicin, a precursor to aspirin. So there's some efficacy there, though you wouldn't know why. For a wound, a poultice of comfrey or yarrow to staunch bleeding and promote healing. For a cough, a concoction of honey and horehound. Some of these remedies might offer genuine, if mild, relief. Many others are utterly useless, their perceived benefits rooted in sympathetic magic, the doctrine of signatures, where a plant resembling a body part is believed to cure ailments of that part, or simply wishful thinking. And some, if the healer misidentifies a plant, could be actively harmful, even poisonous if herbal remedies fail, or if your ailment is deemed to be caused by something more sinister than an imbalance of the body's humors, a concept that, in a simplified form, might still linger. Then more spiritual or magical interventions come into play. Illness is often seen as the work of malevolent spirits, angry ancestral ghosts, the ill-wishing of an enemy, or a punishment from a displeased god, whether one of the old pagan deities or the Christian god, depending on your community's current beliefs. Charms, amulets, and incantations are employed to ward off these evil influences or to appease the angered powers. Amulets made of specific stones, animal teeth, or carved pieces of wood might be worn. Sacred wells or trees might be visited, offerings left. Complex rituals involving chanting, fasting, or specific, often bizarre, actions might be prescribed by a local seer or cunning man. Your recovery, or lack thereof, is often seen as much a spiritual battle as a physical one that injuries are in. Even more immediate and terrifying prospect. Life is physically demanding and often violent. An accident with an axe while chopping wood, a fall from a rickety ladder, a goring by an ox, or, most commonly, a wound sustained in a skirmish or a blood feud. These can all be death sentences. Without antiseptics, even a relatively minor wound can quickly become infected, leading to agonizing pain, swelling, the foul smell of pus, and ultimately, blood poisoning and death. If a limb is badly broken or a wound turns gangrenous, the only cure is amputation. Imagine this procedure, performed without anesthetic, without sterile instruments, perhaps by the local smith who is strong enough to wield the saw, or by a wandering, rough-and-ready surgeon. You'd be held down, screaming, while the limb is hacked off, the stump often cauterized with a red-hot iron to stop the bleeding, the chances of surviving the shock, blood loss, and subsequent infection incredibly slim. Childbirth, that most natural of processes, is a particularly perilous time for women. With only the traditional skills of local midwives, often older women in the village, to rely on, many things could go catastrophically wrong. Prolonged labor, breech births, hemorrhaging. These were often fatal for both mother and child. Infant mortality is heartbreakingly high. Many children do not survive their first year, succumbing to a host of infections and ailments for which there is no effective treatment. To lose a child, or several, is a common, accepted, though no less painful, part of your dark age experience. Life expectancy, therefore, is brutally short by modern standards. While some individuals certainly live to a ripe old age if they were lucky enough to avoid major illness, injury, or violence, many would die in their 30s or 40s. Death is a constant, familiar presence, not hidden away in hospitals, but occurring in your own home, amongst your own kin. You are surrounded by the daily reality of your body's fragility, the precariousness of your health, and the terrifying limitations of any available means to combat sickness or mend injury. In this world, a simple infection can be a death warrant, a broken bone a lifelong disability, and the shadow of an early grave looms large over every man, woman, and child. The body's battles are often lost causes. You've shivered through the collapse of Roman order, witnessed the arrival of fierce Germanic newcomers, and huddled in your smoky timber hall, your life a daily grind of subsistence farming and constant vigilance against a hostile world. We've spoken of sickness, injury, and the grim remedies of your age. But what if you were a woman in this fragmented, violent landscape of Dark Age Britain? Your experience, while sharing many of the common hardships, would be shaped by a unique set of burdens, responsibilities, and profound vulnerabilities. Your life was a testament to endurance, an unceasing cycle of labor, childbearing, and navigating a world where your safety and your very worth were often dictated by the men around you. Imagine your days, from the first gray light of dawn until long after the sun had set, consumed by an endless litany of tasks essential for the survival of your household. You are the mistress of the hearth, the one responsible for coaxing a meager fire to life in the damp chill of morning, for tending the perpetually simmering pottage pot that forms the backbone of your family's diet. You grind the coarse grain, barley, oats, perhaps some rye, using a heavy stone handcorn, a backbreaking, monotonous task if your settlement lacks a watermill or if the miller's fees are too high. Your hands are perpetually stained with flour, soot, and the juices of whatever humble vegetables you prepare. Textile production is your domain, a craft as vital as farming. From shearing the family's few scrawny sheep, if you are fortunate enough to own any, or processing the ret flax harvested from a small plot, to carding, spinning the fibers into thread with a simple drop spindle, and then weaving that thread into coarse, sturdy cloth on an upright loom. It is an intricate, time-consuming process that occupies countless hours. This cloth will become the tunics, cloaks, and blankets for your entire family. Your skill the only barrier between them and the biting cold of a British winter. You dye the fabric using pigments laboriously extracted from plants, woad for blue, madder for red, weld for yellow, your hands often stained with the colors of your craft. You are also the brewer of the household's ale, that essential, safer-than-water beverage. You manage the malting of the grain, the mashing, the boiling with grut herbs, and the careful tending of the fermentation process in wooden tubs or earthenware pots. A successful brew means health and cheer for your family. A spoiled batch means a significant loss of precious resources and a return to risky water. You tend the small garden plot near your dwelling, cultivating the essential onions, leeks, cabbages, and beans that supplement your pottage. You forage in the nearby woods and hedgerows for wild greens, berries, nuts, and medicinal herbs. Your knowledge of the local flora, a vital inheritance passed down from your mother and grandmother. And then there is the relentless cycle of childbearing, arguably your most important and most dangerous duty in a world with terrifyingly high infant and child mortality rates. From a young age, perhaps married off in your mid-teens in an arrangement made between families for land or alliance, your body is dedicated to procreation. Pregnancy is a constant state for much of your adult life, each one carried while you continue your endless daily toil. Childbirth itself is a life-threatening ordeal. You face it in your smoky hut, attended perhaps by an older woman from the village, a local midwife whose skills are based on tradition and experience rather than formal medical knowledge. There is no pain relief beyond perhaps some herbal concoctions or muttered charms. Infection, hemorrhage, obstructed labor. These are common killers of both mother and child. To survive childbirth multiple times is a feat in itself. To see most of your children survive to adulthood is a rare blessing. Your world is also one defined by acute vulnerability. In an age of endemic warfare, feuding, and raiding, women and children are often the primary targets or collateral damage. When your village is attacked, when the long knives of Saxon raiders or the spears of a rival British warband appear at your doorstep, your menfolk might fight and die. But you, if you survive the initial onslaught, face the prospect of abduction, enslavement, or sexual violence. You might be carried off as a spoil of war, forced to become a concubine or a drudge in the household of your captors, your children either killed or similarly enslaved. Even in times of relative peace, your safety is not guaranteed. Without a strong male protector, a father, a husband, a brother, or a powerful lord, you are at the mercy of a harsh society where a woman's legal standing is often minimal, and her worth primarily defined by her fertility and her labor. Your influence, your power, is largely confined to the domestic sphere. Within your household, you are a manager of resources, a healer, a keeper of traditions. Some women, particularly those of higher status, or those who become abbesses in the newly forming Christian monasteries, might wield considerable authority. But for you, the ordinary peasant woman, life is one of hard physical labor, constant anxiety for your children's survival, and a profound dependence on the men who control the land and the weapons. Yet, amidst this toil and terror, there is also resilience. You are the weaver of the social fabric, the keeper of the hearth fire, the one who nurses the sick and brings new life into a harsh world. Your knowledge of herbs, of food preservation, of childcare, is essential for the survival of your community. You find solidarity, perhaps, with other women in your village, sharing the burdens of childcare, the secrets of the loom, the joys and sorrows of your intertwined lives. Your life may be circumscribed by custom and necessity, your voice often unheard in the councils of men, but your contribution to the very survival of your people in this dark and dangerous age is immeasurable, a quiet, enduring strength amidst the chaos. And as you rock your infant by the flickering firelight, singing an ancient lullaby, you pray for a future where their world might be a little safer, a little kinder than your own. You, as a woman in Dark Age Britain, have navigated a life of relentless toil, childbearing, and constant vulnerability, your strength a quiet, enduring counterpoint to the overt brutalities of your age. But the very fabric of this era, whether you are Briton or Saxon, man or woman, is woven through with the crimson threads of endemic warfare. The fall of Rome didn't usher in an age of pastoral peace. It unleashed an age of iron, of blood feuds, of petty kings carving out territories with the spear and the axe. To understand life in Dark Age Britain, you must understand that the shadow of the warrior and the ever-present threat of violence loomed over every hearth and hall. Imagine a landscape where peace is a fragile, temporary truce and conflict is the norm. This isn't the organized, massed warfare of Roman legions, but something more intimate, more localized, and often more savage. Raids are a constant menace. A rival chieftain, a band of land-hungry newcomers, or even a group of opportunistic outlaws might sweep down on your village with little warning. Their aim not conquest in the grand imperial sense, but plunder, livestock, grain, metal goods, tools, and, most terrifyingly, slaves. Your home, your crops, your very life, and the lives of your family are perpetual targets that eye in such a world. The warrior is a central, revered, and necessary figure. Whether you are a Briton clinging to a hill fort in the west, desperately trying to hold back the Saxon tide, or an Anglo-Saxon farmer warrior carving out a new homestead in the fertile eastern plains, your survival, and that of your kin group, depends on the strength of your fighting men. A warrior aristocracy rises, their power built not on Roman law or intricate bureaucracy, but on martial prowess, loyalty, and the ability to protect their followers and reward them with the spoils of war. The comitatus, the warband of loyal. Retainers bound to a lord or chieftain by oaths of fealty and the promise of gifts, rings, weapons, land, becomes the core unit of military and social power. If you are a young man, becoming a warrior is not so much a choice as an expectation. From an early age, you learn the ways of weapons. You practice with a wooden spear and a small shield, your games mimicking the deadly earnest of adult combat. Courage, loyalty to your lord, and a fierce determination to protect your kin are the highest virtues. To flee from battle, to show cowardice, is to invite shame and ostracism. Your worth as a man is measured by your strength, your skill with arms, and your willingness to shed blood, both your enemies and, if necessary, your own. What are the tools of this deadly trade? Forget the intricate armor and siege engines of later medieval warfare. Your Dark Age warrior is equipped for a grittier, more personal kind of combat. The spear is the workhorse weapon, ubiquitous, relatively cheap to produce, and effective both for thrusting in the shield wall and for throwing. Your shield is your primary defense, typically round, made of wood covered with leather, perhaps with a raised iron boss in the center to deflect blows and to be used offensively as a punch. You learn to fight in the shield wheel, the shield wall, a tightly packed formation of warriors, their shields overlapping, presenting a formidable barrier of wood, leather, and iron to the enemy. Axes are common, too, heavy, single-handed throwing axes or the fearsome, long-handled bearded axe, capable of cleaving through a shield or a helmet with a well-aimed blow. The sword, however, is a more prestigious weapon, a symbol of status and wealth. These are often treasured heirlooms, their iron or pattern-welded steel blades representing a significant investment of resources and craftsmanship. To own a fine sword marks you as a warrior of some standing, a thane or gesith in your lord's retinue. The seax, a long, single-edged knife, is another characteristic weapon, particularly among the Saxons, serving as both a tool and a deadly sidearm. Bows and arrows are used, certainly for hunting, and increasingly in warfare, though perhaps not with the same tactical dominance they would achieve in later centuries. Armor, for most, is minimal. A thick leather jerkin, perhaps boiled to harden. It might offer some protection. A simple conical helmet, the spangen helm, constructed from iron bands and plates, could save your skull from a glancing blow. But mail armor, the byrnie or coat of interlinked iron rings, is an incredibly expensive and rare item, reserved for kings, chieftains, and the wealthiest of warriors. For most, your shield, your skill, and your courage are your primary defenses. Against the sharp realities of Dark Age combat, battle, when it comes, is a brutal, terrifying affair. It's often fought at close quarters, a chaotic melee of clashing shields, a cacophony of war cries, screams of the wounded, and the sickening thud of axe on wood and bone. The shield wall is a test of discipline and endurance, a shoving match, where warriors strain to break the enemy's line, jabbing with spears through any gap, hacking with axes over the top. Individual prowess matters, but so does cohesion, the willingness to stand firm with your shield brothers even as those around you fall. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and fear. The fate of the defeated is often grim, slaughter on the field, or capture and enslavement if you are deemed valuable enough. The spoils of war are a powerful motivator. A successful raid or battle means not just glory and renown, but tangible rewards. Looted cattle, sheep, grain, tools, weapons, ornaments, and slaves. Your lord will distribute these spoils amongst his loyal warriors, reinforcing their bonds and ensuring their continued service. His timber hall becomes the center of this warrior culture. Here, after a successful campaign, you feast and drink copious amounts of ale, boast of your deeds in battle, listen to the scop or bard sing tales of ancient heroes and epic conflicts, and receive rings or armbands from your lord as tokens of his favor. It is a world where martial valor is celebrated above all else. But this constant warfare, this glorification of the warrior ethos, comes at a terrible cost. It means a life lived under the perpetual shadow of violence. It means raided farms, burned crops, stolen livestock, and communities shattered by loss. It means a constant drain of manpower, as men are called away from the fields to fight. It means a society where insecurity is the norm, where the strongest arm and the sharpest spear often dictate the law. For every hero celebrated in the mead hall, there are countless unnamed victims. The farmers whose livelihoods are destroyed, the women and children who suffer the brutal consequences of conflict, the young men whose lives are cut short on a bloody field. This gleam of steel in the gloom is the defining characteristic of your age, a costly, bitter price paid for survival and status in a world struggling to find its footing in the ruins of an old empire. The gleam of steel defines your dark age. World, the warrior's code, a harsh necessity for survival amidst feuding kingdoms and relentless raids. But beyond the clang of sword on shield, beyond the smoky hearth of your timber hall, lies another, equally potent and often terrifying landscape, the realm of the spiritual, the supernatural, the divine. In this fractured, uncertain era, your understanding of the world, your hopes for the future, and your fears of the unknown are all profoundly shaped by a complex tapestry of fading Roman deities, tenacious Celtic traditions, the robust paganism of the Germanic newcomers, and the struggling but resilient flame of Christianity. Imagine yourself an Anglo-Saxon settler, newly established in the fertile lands of eastern Britain. The gods you revere are carved from the very fabric of your warrior culture. There is Woden, or Odin, the All-Father, wise, one-eyed, a master of runes and magic, a god of kings, warriors, and poets, who demands sacrifice and welcomes brave fallen warriors to his feasting hall. There is Thunir, Thor, the mighty thunderer, red-bearded and wielding his great hammer, a god of strength, protection, and the common warrior, a bulwark against the chaotic forces of giants and monsters. You call upon Tyr, the one-handed god of war and justice, before a battle, and perhaps upon Frigg or Freya, powerful goddesses associated with love, fertility, fate, and sometimes the battlefield. Your worship is not confined within grand stone temples like those of the Romans you may have heard tales of or seen crumbling in the distance. Instead, you find the sacred in nature, in ancient, gnarled trees within dark, whispering groves, beside bubbling springs or deep, mysterious pools, upon prominent hilltops that seem to touch the sky. Here, you make your offerings, perhaps, a portion of your hunt, a fine weapon, a sacrificed animal, a horse, a bull, a boar, its blood spilled to nourish the gods and consecrate the sacred space. Your priests, if you have them, are not a separate, celibate class like the Christian clergy, but often chieftains or respected elders, men and women who know the rituals, who can interpret the omens, the flight of birds, the casting of lots, the entrails of a sacrificed beast. Your worldview is steeped in a sense of WYRD, an unyielding, somewhat impersonal fate that governs the lives of gods and men alike. Yet within this framework, courage, loyalty, and the pursuit of earthly glory are paramount. Now, picture yourself, a Briton, clinging to your ancestral lands in the west or north, or perhaps living as a subjugated well under Saxon rule. Your spiritual landscape is different, though no less complex. The old Roman gods, Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, their temples are likely in ruins, their cults faded into folk memory, though some of their attributes might have merged with older, native Celtic deities. Your primary faith, especially if you are of Romano-British descent, is Christianity. But this is not the monolithic, centrally organized church of later centuries. British Christianity, cut off from Rome for generations, has developed its own distinct traditions, often referred to as the Celtic Church. It is a faith centered around powerful monastic communities, often founded in remote, wild places, islands, like Iona or Lindisfarne. Though Lindisfarne's great founding comes a bit later, the tradition is there, or hidden valleys in Wales and Cornwall. These monasteries, led by charismatic abbots and abbesses, are not just places of prayer and contemplation. They are vital centers of learning, preserving literacy, copying ancient texts, both sacred and secular, and keeping alive the flickering candle of Roman civilization in a world that seems to be descending into barbarism. Figures like Patrick, working primarily in Ireland, but whose influence profoundly shapes British Christianity, and Gildas, The British monk who lamented the sins of his people and the Saxon incursions represent this tenacious, ascetic, and deeply spiritual form of Christianity. Your local priest, if your community still has one, might be a married man, his practices differing from those that will later be reimposed by missionaries from Rome. The date you celebrate Easter might be different, the tonsure of your monks distinctive. It is a faith under immense pressure, struggling against pagan incursions and its own internal fragmentation. Asterisk, asterisk, and what of the older, deeper pagan traditions of your Celtic ancestors? These have not entirely vanished. Belief in spirits of the land, in powerful nature deities inhabiting wells, rivers, mountains, and ancient groves, often coexists, sometimes uneasily, with Christian belief. Sacred sites, pre-Roman hill forts, stone circles, and burial mounds still hold a potent, numinous power, places to be approached with caution and respect, or perhaps even with offerings to appease the old powers, for everyone in this dark age. World, regardless of formal creed, life is permeated by a belief in magic, superstition, and the supernatural. The world is alive with unseen forces. Elves, are not whimsical fairies, but powerful, often dangerous, supernatural beings who can cause illness or misfortune, elfshot. Goblins, sprites, and other malevolent entities are believed to lurk in the shadows, in the deep forests, in desolate fens. Dragons, like the one Beowulf will later fight in epic poetry, are not just creatures of myth, but terrifyingly real possibilities, hoarders of treasure, bringers of destruction. You use charms and amulets to ward off evil, to protect your livestock, to ensure fertility, or to heal sickness. A piece of iron, a sprig of a specific herb, a carved rune, a whispered incantation. These are your everyday defenses against a world filled with unseen perils. You watch for omens, the cry of a raven, the appearance of a comet, an unusual dream, and seek out those who can interpret their meaning for your life and your community. The line between religious ritual and magical practice is often blurred, indistinct. A Christian prayer might be recited like a magical charm, a pagan offering made to a local saint who has inherited the attributes of an older deity. This rich, complex, and often terrifying spiritual and supernatural landscape is how you make sense of your precarious existence. In a world of sudden violence, inexplicable disease, and the constant threat of hunger, your beliefs offer explanations, however frightening, and prescribe actions, however seemingly irrational, to try and control the uncontrollable. Whether you are offering a sacrifice to Woden in a sun-dappled grove, praying to Christ in a crumbling stone church, or leaving a token at a sacred well to appease an ancient spirit, your life is lived in constant awareness of powers beyond your immediate comprehension, powers that demand respect, appeasement, and sometimes the ultimate price. Your spiritual maze is as real and as challenging to navigate as the physical dangers that surround your Dark Age hearth. You navigate your Dark Age existence surrounded by a complex spiritual world of old gods, new saints, and ever-present supernatural forces, your beliefs a vital compass in a life defined by hardship and uncertainty. The clang of steel from your Lord's Hall is a constant reminder of the warrior ethos that governs your society. But beyond the battles of the body and the spirit, there's another, equally relentless struggle that defines your daily life. The simple, grinding necessity of acquiring the resources to survive in a world where the old economic certainties have shattered like Roman pottery under a Saxon boot. Imagine the economic landscape left behind by the departed Roman legions. The intricate network of trade that once crisscrossed Britannia and connected it to the vast empire is in tatters. The well-maintained roads are decaying, making travel for merchants perilous and slow. The bustling towns, once centers of commerce and specialized crafts, are shrinking, their marketplaces often deserted or reduced to small, local affairs. Most critically, the steady supply of Roman coinage, the very lubricant of a complex economy, has dried up. Old Roman coins might still circulate, hoarded as bullion or used in high-status exchanges, but for you, the ordinary farmer or craftsman, cash transactions become increasingly rare. Your world, by necessity, reverts to a more ancient, more direct form of exchange, barter. Your life becomes a constant calculation of value, not in silver denarii or golden solidi, but in bushels of barley, in days of labor, in the worth of a hand-woven cloak or a well-made iron axe head. If you need a new pot from the village potter, you might trade a few chickens or a portion of your vegetable harvest. If the smith needs charcoal for his forge, you might provide it in exchange for him mending your broken plowshare. A surplus of wool from your sheep could be swapped for salt from a wandering peddler, or perhaps for a bit of preserved fish if you live far from the coast. This system works, after a fashion, for local needs, but it's cumbersome, inefficient, and makes any form of long-distance trade or accumulation of abstract wealth incredibly difficult. How many clay pots is a pig worth? How many hours of your labor will secure enough grain to see your family through a lean month? These are the questions that dominate your economic thoughts. Local markets, where they still exist, are small, often periodic gatherings. Here, you might bring any tiny surplus you possess, a few eggs, a bit of cheese, a roughly woven piece of cloth, hoping to trade it for something you desperately need but cannot produce yourself, like an iron knife, a cornstone for grinding your grain, or perhaps a few precious handfuls of salt. These markets are vital, but they are a far cry from the sophisticated commercial hubs of the Roman era. The range of goods is limited, the quality often crude, and every transaction is a careful negotiation. Later in this period, particularly in the more settled Anglo-Saxon kingdoms or around key monastic centers, more organized trading posts or emporia begin to emerge, often at coastal or riverside locations like Hamwick, Southampton, Londonwick, London, or Eoforwick, York. These become nexuses for a revived, if still limited, long-distance trade. Here, merchants might bring goods from across the North Sea or even further afield, Frankish pottery, glassware, wine, perhaps some spices or fine textiles. But these are largely luxury items, destined for the halls of kings, chieftains, and wealthy churchmen. For you, the average peasant, these emporia are distant, almost mythical places, their wares far beyond your reach. Your economic world remains intensely local. What about those who have no surplus to barter, no craft to trade? If you are a landless laborer, you trade the only thing you possess, your physical strength. You work for your lord or for a more prosperous farmer in exchange for your daily sustenance, a portion of food, a place to sleep in the hall or an outbuilding, perhaps a few scraps of clothing. Your life is one of absolute dependence, your economic well-being tied directly to your ability to perform hard labor and the willingness of others to provide for you in return. In this world, wealth is often measured not in hoarded coin, but in land, in livestock, in stores of grain, and, crucially, in people, in the number of loyal warriors a lord can command, in the number of tenants and slaves who work his estates. For the warrior elite, the gift economy is paramount. A king or chieftain maintains his power and the loyalty of his comitatus, his war band, not by paying them wages in coin, but by bestowing upon them lavish gifts, fine weapons, swords, helmets, mail shirts, gold and silver arm rings or torques, horses, and grants of land seized in conquest. This constant flow of treasure from lord to retainer and back again in the form of loyal service and military support is the engine that drives much of the high-status economy. Your lord's magnificent gold brooch or his pattern-welded sword is not just an ornament or a weapon. It is a symbol of his power, his generosity, and the intricate web of obligations that binds his society together. But this gift economy of the elite has little bearing on your daily struggle. You are at the bottom of this resource chain. You produce the food, the raw materials, the surplus that allows your lord to maintain his war band and his status. A significant portion of what you create is siphoned off as rent, as tribute, as dues, leaving you with just enough, in good years, to scrape by. In bad years, when the harvest fails or your lord's demands are particularly heavy, you face disaster. There are no banks to offer loans, no complex credit systems to tide you over. You might fall into debt bondage to your lord or a wealthier neighbor, effectively becoming a slave until the debt is repaid, a process that could take a lifetime or more. The fading glimmer of Roman coin represents more than just a change in currency. It signifies the collapse of a vast, interconnected economic world and a return to a more fragmented, localized, and precarious existence. Your life is defined by self-sufficiency, by making do, by the constant, anxious calculation of how to stretch meager resources to meet the endless demands of survival and obligation. The broken hoard of a once great empire offers little comfort. Only the stark reality of an age where wealth is tangible, local, and for most, perpetually out of reach. Your Dark Age life, whether Briton or Saxon, is a precarious dance of survival. Governed by the shifting tides of local power, the demands of a sparse economy based on barter and tribute, and the ever-present whispers of gods and spirits in a world only partially understood. We've explored the smoky halls, the bloody battlefields, the failing remedies for sickness, and the woman's relentless toil. But what of the very youngest in this harsh and unforgiving era? What was it like to be a child in Dark Age Britain? To take your first steps, learn your first words, and grow towards an uncertain adulthood in a land steeped in shadow and strife? Prepare to have any romantic notions of carefree, pastoral childhoods thoroughly dispelled. Asterisk, your very entry into this world is fraught with peril. As we've touched upon, childbirth is a dangerous affair for your mother, and for you, the newborn. The odds are stacked against you from your first breath. Infant mortality is terrifyingly high. Disease, malnutrition in your mother leading to a difficult birth or insufficient milk, simple infections that a modern child would shrug off. These are all potent threats that can snuff out your tiny life before it has barely begun. Many children in this era do not see their first birthday. Many more do not survive to their fifth. Your parents, having likely lost other children before you, might greet your arrival with a guarded hope, a love tinged with the constant gnawing fear of your potential loss, that if you survive these initial treacherous years, your childhood is not a period of protected innocence and leisurely play, as you might imagine it today. It is, instead, an early and often brutal apprenticeship for the harsh realities of adult life. There is no concept of extended schooling for you, the common child. Reading and writing are rare skills, mostly confined to the clergy in monasteries or perhaps the households of kings and great lords. Your education is intensely practical, learned by doing, by observing, by imitating your parents and elder siblings. From the moment you can walk steadily and understand simple commands, you are expected to contribute to the household's survival. As a small child, your tasks might be simple: scaring birds from the precious crops in the field, gathering firewood, twigs and fallen branches, fetching water from the well or stream, a daily, arduous chore, watching over even younger siblings while your mother is occupied with spinning, weaving, or food preparation. You learn to handle a small knife for whittling or preparing vegetables almost as soon as your fingers are strong enough. You learn the names of edible plants and dangerous ones during foraging expeditions with your mother. As you grow, so do your responsibilities. If you are a boy, you will spend more time with your father and older brothers in the fields, learning to guide the plow, if your family has one, to sow seed, to wield a sickle at harvest time. You will learn to tend to the livestock, the family pig, the cow, the sheep, how to mend fences, how to identify animal sickness. You will also learn the ways of weapons, for in this violent age, every boy is a potential warrior. You might start with a wooden play spear and shield, engaging in mock battles with other village boys. But soon enough, you will be expected to handle the real thing, to understand your place in the shield wall should your village or lord require. Your service, that if you are a girl, your apprenticeship is to your mother. You learn to grind grain on the heavy handcorn, a task that builds strength in your arms and back. You learn the intricate, time-consuming arts of spinning wool or flax into thread using a drop spindle, and then weaving that thread into cloth on the upright loom that might dominate one corner of your smoky hut. You learn to prepare the endless pottage, to bake coarse bread in the embers, to make cheese or butter if your family has milk. You learn about herbs for healing and for flavoring. You learn to mend clothes, to care for infants, to manage the meager resources of the household. Your days are a continuous cycle of domestic toil, preparing you for the role of wife and mother that will likely be yours from your mid-teens. Play, when it happens, is simple, often boisterous, and usually incorporates elements of the adult world you are so rapidly entering. You might have a roughly carved wooden doll or animal figure, a leather ball stuffed with rags, or play games of tag and chase amongst the huts and fields. Storytelling is vital. In the long, dark evenings, huddled around the hearth fire, you listen, enthralled, as elders recount tales of ancient heroes, fierce battles, cunning gods, mischievous spirits, and terrifying monsters lurking in the deep forests or misty fens, stories like those that would eventually be woven into epics such as Beowulf. These tales are your entertainment, your history lesson, and your moral instruction, all rolled into one, but the dangers of your world are never far away. Accidents are common. An open hearth fire in a crowded hut is a constant hazard for an unwary child. Sharp tools, dangerous animals, falls from trees, or rickety structures all can lead to serious injury, which, as we've seen, often means infection and death. Disease sweeps through communities, and children, with their less developed immune systems, are particularly vulnerable. And then there is the ever-present threat of raids and warfare. If your village is attacked, you are as much a target as any adult. You might witness unspeakable violence, lose your parents, or be carried, often to slavery by victorious raiders. The psychological toll of growing up in such an insecure, often terrifying, environment, where loss and hardship are commonplace, is immeasurable. Your childhood, in essence, is a compressed and intensified version of adult life. You are expected to be resilient, resourceful, and obedient from a very young age. There is little room for childish whims or prolonged dependency. You are a vital contributor to your family's economy, your small hands performing essential tasks. The concept of a carefree, protected childhood, sheltered from the harsh realities of the world, simply does not exist for most. You are learning to survive in a shadowed land, your small shoulders already bearing heavy burdens, your eyes already reflecting a knowledge of hardship that no child should have to possess. And your greatest hope is simply to reach adulthood, a milestone many of your peers will never see. Your dark age childhood, if you've managed to survive its many perils, has been a swift, brutal education in the realities of a harsh world. You've learned to contribute to the household from your earliest years, your small hands already calloused from toil, your eyes already reflecting a weariness beyond your tender age. You exist within a society governed by the warrior's code. Your spiritual life a complex tapestry of old gods and new faiths. Your economic survival a constant juggle of barter and meager resources. But now, let's step outside the smoky confines of your timber hall or wattle and daub hut and look at the broader environment that shapes your existence. The very land of Britain itself, a landscape far wilder, more untamed, and often more menacing than you can easily imagine from your modern vantage point. With the Roman legions long gone and the subsequent centuries of upheaval, conflict, and population shifts, much of Britain has, in a sense, reverted to a wilder state. The meticulously cultivated farmlands of the Roman villa system have, in many areas, shrunk or been abandoned. Forests, those vast, ancient woodlands of oak, ash, and thorn, have begun to reclaim areas once cleared for agriculture. These are not the managed, park-like woods you might picture. These are dense, tangled, often impenetrable wildernesses, the wildwood of legend. For you, the Dark Age inhabitant, the forest is a place of profound duality, a vital source of sustenance, and a realm of considerable danger and mystery. It provides the timber for your homes, your tools, your palisades, and the very fuel that warms your hearth and cooks your food. You venture into its fringes to gather firewood, to let your precious pigs forage for acorns and beech mast, the right of pannage, if your lord grants it. You hunt for small game here, squirrels, rabbits, if they are present in your area, birds, though always with the risk of being caught poaching if the forest belongs to a powerful lord who reserves the hunt for himself. You gather wild honey from ancient trees, forage for edible fungi, a perilous undertaking, as we've noted, nuts, berries, and medicinal herbs. The forest is a larder, a workshop, a pharmacy, asterisk asterisk, but it is also a place of fear. Wolves and in some wilder, more remote regions, Perhaps even the last lingering bears or boar still roam these forests, a threat to your livestock and, occasionally, to a lone or unwary human. Getting lost in the dense, trackless woods is a terrifyingly easy prospect. And the forest is the natural haunt of outlaws, bandits, and desperate men fleeing retribution, making any solitary journey through its depths a risky venture. Beyond the physical dangers, the forest holds a powerful place in your cultural imagination. It is the realm of spirits, of ancient, pre-Christian deities, of elves, goblins, and other mysterious, often malevolent, supernatural beings. Every gnarled oak, every shadowy glade, every rustle in the undergrowth can seem imbued with an uncanny presence. The deep woods are where the boundaries between your world and the other world feel perilously thin. Then there are the watery wastes, the fens, the marshes, the undrained river valleys that cover significant parts of the British landscape. These two are realms of both opportunity and peril. They offer a different kind of bounty: reeds and rushes for thatching your roof and strewing your floor, willow for basketry, wildfowl, ducks, geese, swans, to be hunted or snared, and fish like eels, pike, and perch from the slow-moving waters. Peat, cut from bogs and dried, provides a vital alternative fuel source in areas where wood is scarce, but these wetlands are also dangerous, unhealthy places. Travel through them is difficult and treacherous, often requiring specialized knowledge of hidden paths or the use of crude log boats or coracles. The damp, stagnant air breeds fevers and agues, likely malaria in some areas. Flooding is a constant threat, capable of inundating your meager riverside fields or even your dwelling. And like the forests, these misty, watery landscapes are often seen as haunted, home to will-o'-the-wisps, water spirits, and perhaps even monsters like Grendel's mother, lurking in their murky depths. They can also, however, serve as places of refuge. In times of invasion or extreme persecution, isolated communities or individuals might retreat into the fens and marshes, their inaccessibility providing a measure of protection from pursuing enemies. The coastline, too, presents its own unique set of challenges and opportunities. If you live near the sea, you are acutely aware of its dual nature. It can provide a rich harvest of fish, shellfish, and seaweed. Occasionally, a shipwreck might wash ashore, its cargo a sudden, unexpected windfall, though often claimed by the local lord. But the sea is also the highway for raiders, first the Irish Scotty, then the Saxons, and later, the terrifying Vikings. Every unfamiliar sail on the horizon brings a surge of fear. Storms can destroy fishing boats and coastal settlements, and the constant erosion of the coastline is an ever-present threat in some areas. You live in close, often uncomfortable, proximity to the wild creatures of this land. While larger predators like bears are becoming rarer, wolves are still a significant menace to livestock and occasionally to humans, especially in winter. Wild boar, fierce and dangerous, can still be encountered in the deeper forests. Birds of prey circle overhead. Your relationship with the animal world is one of pragmatic necessity. What can be eaten, what can be used for clothing or tools, and what must be feared and defended against, part of the ongoing story of this era, particularly with the spread of Anglo-Saxon settlement, is the slow, laborious process of taming this wilder landscape. Forests are gradually cleared for new fields, marshes drained, land brought under cultivation. It is a constant battle against the encroaching wilderness, a testament to human resilience and the unceasing need to carve out a space for survival and sustenance. But for much of the Dark Ages, you live in a world where the boundaries between the tame and the wild are fluid and often contested, a world where the primeval forest looms large at the edge of your small clearing, a constant reminder of the raw, untamed power of nature and the many dangers, both seen and unseen, that lurk just beyond the flickering light of your hearth fire. You navigate a Dark Age Britain where the untamed landscape is both a larder and a lair, a source of meager sustenance and profound, often supernatural, fear. You've seen how childhood is a brief, harsh apprenticeship for a life of toil and danger. But how do you, as an individual in this fragmented, insecure world, actually structure your existence? Who do you turn to for aid, for justice, for a sense of belonging? In the absence of a unifying Roman state, your world contracts, and your primary loyalties, your very identity, become rooted in the most fundamental human connections: blood, kin, and the immediate community gathered under the shadow of a local lord. Imagine your life without the overarching framework of a distant emperor or a codified system of imperial law. Your first and foremost allegiance, the bedrock of your social existence, is to your kin, your mate if you are of Anglo-Saxon stock, or your senator if you are a Briton. This is your extended family, your lineage, a network of uncles, aunts, cousins, and more distant relations, all bound by shared blood and mutual obligation. Your kin are your first line of defense, your social safety net, however frayed, and your primary agents of justice. If you are wronged, injured, or killed, it is your kin who are honor-bound to seek vengeance or demand compensation. The blood feud, that ancient, terrible cycle of reciprocal violence, is a constant possibility, a shadow lurking over inter-family disputes. An insult to one member is an insult to all. A life taken demands a life in return, unless the debt can be settled by other means. You live within a small community, perhaps a ton or ham, a village or hamlet, a cluster of timber dwellings and their associated agricultural plots, often huddled together for mutual protection. This is your immediate world, populated by other families, some related to you by blood or marriage, others simply your neighbors in this shared struggle for survival. Within this village, there are unwritten rules, ancient customs that govern daily life, from the allocation of strips in the communal fields to the resolution of minor disputes. Decisions might be made by a council of elders, or by the most prominent landholders, but always under the overarching authority of your local lord or chieftain. This lord, whether he is a British warlord clinging to a crumbling hill fort, or an Anglo-Saxon thane presiding over his newly established estate and timber hall, is the dominant figure in your social and political landscape. Your relationship with him is one of complex, often unequal, reciprocity. He and his comitatus, or war band of loyal warrior retainers, are supposed to offer you protection from external threats, rival lords, raiding parties, opportunistic bandits. He is the dispenser of justice, the one who presides over local courts, if such formal structures exist, settles feuds, and enforces, or creates the local laws that in return for this protection and rough justice. Your obligations to him are many. If you are a ceorl, a free peasant farmer in Anglo-Saxon society, or a jebber, a peasant with certain land rights but heavier service obligations, you owe him a portion of your produce as rent or tribute. You owe him labor service on his own domain lands, toiling in his fields for a set number of days each week. You are expected to answer his call to arms, to join the FYRD, the local militia, or his personal war band, bringing your own spear and shield to defend his territory or participate in his offensive campaigns. Your loyalty to him is paramount, often sealed by oaths, and to betray that loyalty is a crime of the utmost severity. Society is starkly hierarchical. At the top is your lord and his warrior elite, the thanes or gesiths, men whose lives are dedicated to warfare, who are rewarded by the lord with gifts of land, weapons, and treasure. Their status is displayed through their fine weaponry, their, perhaps limited, armor, their horses, and the richness of their attire. They feast in the lord's hall, listen to tales of heroic deeds, and form the core of his military power. Below them are the free peasants like yourself, the ceorls, who form the backbone of the agricultural economy. You have certain customary rights to your land, though you may not own it in the modern sense, to graze your animals on the common pasture, to gather wood from the forest within limits. But your life is one of hard labor and constant obligation. And then, at the very bottom of this social ladder, are the slaves, the theos in Anglo-Saxon England, or the Britons, wheels, subjugated by the newcomers. Slavery is a grim reality of your Dark Age world. People become slaves through capture and war, a common fate for defeated enemies, including women and children, through debt, as punishment for certain crimes, or simply by being born to a slave mother. As a slave, you have virtually no rights. You are property, to be bought and sold, to be worked to exhaustion, to be beaten or even killed at your master's whim. Your labor is entirely for the benefit of your owner, your diet the meanest scraps, your shelter the poorest corner of an outbuilding. Escape is difficult and brutally punished if you are caught. This underclass of unfree labor is a significant, if often overlooked, part of the economic and social fabric of the AGEINA world, where formal legal structures are often weak or localized. Oaths and personal loyalty are the glue that holds society together, however imperfectly. An oath sworn on a sacred object, a weapon, a holy relic, a sacred tree, is a powerful, binding commitment. Hospitality, too, is a crucial social custom. In a dangerous world where travel is perilous, offering food and shelter to a traveler is a sacred duty, but it also comes with its own set of obligations and potential dangers for both host and guest. The system of wergild, or man price, is a key mechanism for trying to regulate violence and prevent feuds from spiraling out of control. Every person, from the king down to the lowliest freeman, slaves often had no wergild, or it was paid to their owner, has a monetary value assigned to them based on their social rank. If someone is killed, their kin are entitled to receive this wergild from the killer or the killer's kin. To refuse to pay, or to be unable to pay, often means the continuation of the blood feud. This system, while appearing crude, acknowledges the value of life, at least in monetary terms according to status, and provides a socially accepted alternative to endless cycles of revenge. Your belonging, then, is to your kin, your village, your lord. These are the concentric circles of your social world, each demanding loyalty, each offering a measure of security, however fragile. It is a world held together by personal bonds, by ancient customs, by the ever-present threat of violence, and by the long, powerful shadow cast by your local lord, whose hall is both the center of your community and the symbol of your often onerous obligations. You live your dark age life bound by the iron ties of kinship, your fortunes tied to the whims of your local lord, your days a constant struggle for sustenance and security within a fragmented and often violent land. We've explored the smoky halls, the meager farms, the makeshift sickbeds, and the battlefields where life was so cheaply spent. It's easy to imagine this era as one of unremitting gloom, a cultural wasteland where the sophisticated arts and learning of the Roman world had entirely withered away. And while it's true that much was lost, that life for most was brutally pragmatic. To paint the entire period as devoid of beauty, creativity, or intellectual endeavor would be to miss the flickering, often fragile, lights that still burned in the darkness. Asterisk for you. The ordinary peasant or farmer, direct access to high culture, as we might understand it, was virtually non-existent. Your world was largely an oral one. Literacy, once relatively widespread in Roman Britain, had retreated dramatically, becoming primarily the preserve of the clergy within monastic walls. But this did not mean your life was devoid of story, of poetry, of a rich, imaginative landscape. The primary vehicle for culture was the spoken word, the power of memory, the skill of the storyteller and the poet. Imagine yourself in your lord's timber mead hall, the air thick with wood smoke, the scent of roasting meat, if it's a feast night, and spilt ale. After the serious business of eating and drinking, as the fires burn low and the shadows dance. On the carved wall posts, the scop, if you are Anglo-Saxon, or the bard, if you are British, rises. This is not just an entertainer. This is your community's historian, genealogist, moral compass, and keeper of traditions. With a harp or lyre, they begin to chant the ancient lays, the epic poems that recount the deeds of legendary heroes, the valor of warriors in desperate battles, the cunning of gods, the terror of monsters lurking in the fens and forests. You listen, enthralled, to tales of dragon slayers, of tragic kings, of feuds and loyalties, of the relentless workings of fate. These stories, passed down through generations, define your people's identity, celebrate their values, courage, loyalty, generosity in a lord, steadfastness in a warrior, and offer a way to make sense of your often chaotic and violent world. They are your literature, your history, your entertainment, all woven into one powerful oral tapestry. And what of the material arts? While grand Roman mosaics and classical sculptures were no longer being created, a vibrant and distinctive artistic tradition flourished, particularly in metalwork. If you were a high-status warrior, your most prized possessions, your sword, your helmet, your shield boss, your brooches and belt buckles, would often be objects of incredible craftsmanship. Anglo-Saxon and Celtic smiths were masters of intricate interlaced patterns, zoomorphic designs, stylized animals, and the use of garnet inlay and cloisonné enamel. Treasures like those found in the Sutton Hoo ship burial, with their magnificent gold buckles, jewel-encrusted sword hilts, and the iconic helmet, speak of a sophisticated artistry and a society that valued ostentatious display of wealth and status, at least among its elite. These objects were not just functional. They were statements of power, identity, and connection to a rich symbolic world. Textiles, too, though rarely surviving in the archaeological record, could be works of art. While your everyday clothing was coarse homespun, noble women and those in monastic communities produced finer fabrics, often dyed with expensive pigments and perhaps intricately embroidered with scenes from scripture or legend. Wood and bone carving also continued, with everyday objects like combs, knife handles, and caskets often adorned with detailed patterns or figural scenes. However, it is within the walls of the monasteries that the flame of literacy and classical learning was most carefully tended during these centuries. In places like Iona, Lindisfarne, Jarrow in the north, or the great Welsh and Irish monastic schools, monks laboriously copied ancient manuscripts, not just the Bible and the writings of the Church Fathers, but also classical texts by Virgil, Ovid, and others, preserving a fragile link to the intellectual heritage of Rome. It was in these scriptoria that the magnificent illuminated manuscripts of the era were created, pages of vellum painstakingly inscribed with beautiful calligraphy and adorned with breathtakingly intricate illustrations and decorations, like the Lindisfarne Gospels or the Book of Kells. Though the latter is primarily Irish, its influence and style were part of a shared insular Christian artistic world. These books were not for you, the illiterate peasant. They were treasures of the church, objects of devotion and learning for a tiny, educated elite. But they represent a profound commitment to preserving knowledge in an age of widespread ignorance. Great scholars also emerged from these monastic centers. Figures like the Venerable Bede, working in his monastery at Jarrow in the early 8th century, wrote his ecclesiastical history of the English people, a work of profound scholarship that remains one of our most important sources for understanding this period. He and others like him were a testament to the fact that intellectual life, though contracted, had not been extinguished. But this culture was undeniably fragile, its survival often precarious. A Viking raid could see a monastery looted and burned, its precious library of manuscripts destroyed in an instant. The death of a skilled metalworker or poet without an apprentice to pass on their craft could mean the loss of unique artistic traditions. And for you, the vast majority of the population toiling in the fields, this world of intricate gold work, illuminated manuscripts, and epic poetry was largely out of reach. Your art was perhaps the rough carving on a wooden spoon, the pattern woven into a piece of homespun cloth, the traditional songs sung at harvest time or around the winter fire, or the crude, painted good luck charm hung over your doorway does so. While the term Dark Ages can be misleading if it implies a total absence of culture and learning, it certainly reflects a period where these things were more localized, more vulnerable, and accessible to far fewer people than in the Roman era that preceded it or the High Middle Ages that followed. The echoes in the mead hall and the flickering light in the monastic cloister were vital sparks, but they illuminated only small corners of a world that, for most of its inhabitants, remained shrouded in the more immediate concerns of survival. The great sagas and glittering treasures were for the few. For you, the daily reality was more likely the repetitive rhythm of the cornstone and the simple, unadorned utility of your wooden bowl that you've seen how art, poetry, and learning, though fragile and often confined to the elite or the cloister, still flickered in the shadowed halls and monastic scriptoria of Dark Age Britain. These were the attempts of a society to find meaning, to record its identity, to reach for something beyond the brutal pragmatism of daily survival. But the most profound and transformative cultural shift during these centuries was arguably the slow, complex, and often contested battle for the very soul of the land. The gradual Christianization of the pagan Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and the evolving nature of the existing British Church. Imagine the spiritual landscape you inhabit in the earlier part of this era, say the 5th or 6th century. If you are a Briton, your ancestors had known Roman paganism, which then largely gave way to Christianity, a faith that had taken root during the later Roman Empire. Now, with Roman authority gone and your lands increasingly encroached upon by Germanic newcomers, your Christian faith is a beleaguered one. It's tenacious, certainly, preserved in the Western and Northern kingdoms, and centered around powerful monastic communities that are bastions of learning and ascetic devotion. Figures like St. Patrick have already evangelized Ireland, and Irish monks, with their distinctive traditions, a different calculation for Easter, a unique tonsure, a strong emphasis on penance and scholarship, are beginning to send missions back to Britain, particularly to the north. This Celtic or insular Christianity is a vibrant, if somewhat isolated, expression of the faith. If, however, you are an Anglo-Saxon, one of the Angles, Saxons, or Jutes who have carved out new kingdoms in the fertile lands of the East and South. Your gods are those of the ancient Germanic world. You worship Woden, the wise and cunning All-Father, Thunir, the mighty hammer-wielding protector, Tw, the god of war, and a host of other deities associated with nature, fertility, and fate. Your sacred spaces are not stone churches, but ancient groves, prominent hills, or besides sacred wells and springs. You offer sacrifices, animals, perhaps, or precious goods, to appease these gods and win their favor in battle, for good harvests, or for the health of your kin. Your worldview is shaped by a belief in fate, the importance of earthly glory, and the bonds of loyalty within your warband. Then, as the centuries turn, a new spiritual tide begins to flow. From the south, from Rome itself, Pope Gregory the Great, spurred by the sight of fair-haired Anglian slave boys in the Roman market, or so the story goes, with him remarking, "Non Angli, sed angeli, not Angles, but angels," dispatches a mission. In 597 AD, a monk named Augustine lands in Kent, ruled by King Ethelbert. Ethelbert is a pagan, but his wife, Bertha, is a Christian Frankish princess, and she has brought her own chaplain with her. This royal connection provides Augustine with a crucial foothold. The conversion of a king is the key. If you are a subject of Ethelbert, his decision to embrace the new faith, however cautious or politically motivated it might be, has profound implications for you. Kings in this era do not generally allow their people to follow a different religion from their own. So, with Ethelbert's baptism, Christianity begins to spread, at least officially, throughout his kingdom. Augustine establishes his see at Canterbury, which will become the spiritual heart of the English Church. This is not always a smooth or immediate process. The pagan traditions are deeply ingrained. Priests of the old gods, local chieftains, and ordinary folk might resist this new faith from a distant, foreign land. There are periods of reversion, where a king's successor might reject Christianity and return to paganism, plunging the fledgling church into crisis. But the momentum slowly, inexorably, builds. Missionaries, both from Rome and from the Irish, Celtic traditions spreading south from Iona and Lindisfarne, begin to travel throughout the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Imagine the scene in your village when one of these missionaries arrives. Perhaps it is a stern Roman monk, clad in simple robes, carrying a silver cross and a painted icon of Christ. Or perhaps it is a more ascetic Irish monk, his appearance wilder, his message perhaps more mystical. They preach in the open air, or perhaps gain permission to speak in your Lord's hall. They tell stories of a single, all-powerful God, of his Son Jesus Christ who died for the sins of mankind, of a heaven of eternal bliss and a hell of eternal torment. This is a very different worldview from the fatalism of WYRD or the earthy pragmatism of your old gods. The methods of conversion are often top-down. The missionaries target the king and his nobles. If the king converts, his court and his kingdom are expected to follow. Sometimes, there are dramatic confrontations, like the famous, though perhaps embellished, story of the Northumbrian King Edwin and his council debating whether to accept Christianity, where a pagan high priest, Coifi, himself desecrates his own temple after being convinced of the new faith's power. Other times, the conversion is more gradual, a slow syncretism where old pagan festivals are subtly transformed into Christian holy days or sacred pagan sites. Wells, groves, hilltops are rededicated with a cross or a small chapel. Pope Gregory himself advised Augustine to purify pagan temples and convert them to Christian use rather than destroying them, to make the transition easier for the populace. For you, the ordinary person, this shift in faith is momentous. Your old certainties are challenged. The sacred grove where your ancestors made offerings might now be declared a place of demons. The charms and amulets you relied on for protection might be denounced as superstitious vanities. You are taught new prayers, new rituals, a new moral code. The local wooden temple to Woden might be pulled down, and in its place, a small timber church, perhaps later a stone one, begins to rise, the sound of its bell replacing the rustle of leaves in the sacred grove. The clash between the Roman and Celtic forms of Christianity also needs to be resolved. Different dates for Easter, different monastic rules, different styles of tonsure. These might seem like minor points to you, but to the church leaders, they represent significant divisions in authority and tradition. Eventually, at councils, like the Synod of Whitby in 664 AD, the Roman practices tend to prevail, leading to a more unified, though still evolving, English church under the authority of Canterbury and, ultimately, Rome. This slow, often uneven, process of Christianization profoundly reshapes the spiritual, cultural, and even political landscape of Dark Age Britain. It brings with it a renewed emphasis on Latin literacy, the establishment of monasteries as centers of learning and manuscript production, a new moral framework, and new forms of art and architecture. But the old ways die hard. For generations, pagan beliefs and practices will continue to linger beneath the surface of official Christianity, a whispered echo in the folklore, the place names, and the deep-rooted superstitions of your world. You are living through an age of profound spiritual transformation, a time when the old gods are reluctantly giving way, and the shadow of the cross is slowly, but surely, lengthening across the land. You are living through an age of profound spiritual transformation in Dark Age Britain, where the ancient pagan gods of grove and hill are slowly, often reluctantly, giving way to the new faith of the cross, brought by missionaries from both Rome and the Celtic West. This battle for souls is a monumental shift, reshaping your worldview, your rituals, and the very moral fabric of your nascent society. But even as these spiritual tides ebb and flow, another, more earthly, and far more bloody struggle defines your existence. The relentless, chaotic warfare between the myriad petty kingdoms that have risen from the ashes of Roman Britannia. The unified, centrally administered province of the Roman past is a distant, almost mythical memory. In its place, the island of Britain has fractured into a mosaic of competing territories, each ruled by a king or chieftain whose authority is often as precarious as the wooden palisades that defend his timber hall. If you are an Anglo-Saxon, your loyalties lie with one of the kingdoms that now dominate much of what will become England, perhaps Kent, Sussex, or Essex in the southeast, East Anglia on the coast, Wessex, rising in power in the south, Mercia, a sprawling, often aggressive kingdom in the Midlands, or the once mighty Northumbria in the north, itself a fusion of Bernicia and Dara. This collection of kingdoms is sometimes referred to as the Heptarchy, though the number 7 is a convenient simplification. The political map was a constantly shifting kaleidoscope of greater and lesser powers. If you are a Briton, your people still hold sway in the rugged west, in Dumnonia, Cornwall, and Devon, in the various kingdoms of Wales, like Gwynedd, Powys, and Dyfed, and in the north, in places like Strathclyde or the Pictish lands beyond the Forth. For you, life is not just about internal squabbles. It is a constant, existential struggle against the encroaching Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to your east, a slow, fighting retreat to preserve your language, your culture, and your independence. What does it mean to be a king in this dark age world? Your king is not a distant, robed figure dispensing justice from a magnificent palace. He is primarily a war leader, a Drighton lord, who commands the personal loyalty of his thanes or warrior companions. His crown is as likely to be a simple iron band, or perhaps a more ornate helmet, as a jeweled diadem. His palace is a great timber mead hall, smoky and boisterous, where he feasts his warriors, distributes plunder and gifts, rings, weapons, horses, land, to ensure their continued loyalty, and plans his next campaign. His authority rests on his ability to win battles, to protect his people from raids, and to provide for his followers. A weak or unlucky king, one who suffers too many defeats or fails to secure enough booty, can quickly find his warriors drifting away to a more promising leader, or even face a challenge from a rival kinsman for his precarious throne. Dynastic struggles, betrayals, and assassinations are commonplace, and warfare is the constant, brutal rhythm of this age. These fledgling kingdoms are rarely at peace with one another. They fight for land, for resources, cattle, slaves, treasure, for control of vital trade routes, such as they are, or simply for glory and the assertion of dominance. The concept of a Bretwalda, an overlord or Briton ruler among the Anglo-Saxon kings, emerges, a recognition of one king's temporary preeminence, often achieved through military might. But such overlordship is usually fleeting, constantly challenged by ambitious rivals. Mercia under Pinda or Offa, Northumbria under Edwin or Oswald, Wessex under Egbert. Each kingdom has its period of ascendancy, usually bought at the cost of immense bloodshed and the suffering of its neighbors. For you, the ordinary peasant farmer or craftsman, this constant inter-kingdom warfare is a terrifying reality that directly impacts your life. Your village might lie on a disputed border, making it a prime target for raids from either side. One year, you owe allegiance and tribute to the king of Mercia. The next, after a bloody battle and a shift in the frontier, you find yourself under the rule of a West Saxon lord. Your own king or lord will frequently call upon you for service in the FYRD, the local militia, obliging you to leave your fields and family to take up your spear and shield and march off on some distant, dangerous campaign. The chances of returning are never certain. Even if your village is not directly on the front lines, the ripples of war spread far. Armies marching through your territory, even friendly ones, need to be fed, often requisitioning your precious grain and livestock, leaving your own family to face a leaner winter. Passing warbands might see your meager possessions as legitimate plunder. The insecurity is relentless. You might carefully plant your crops in the spring, only to see them burned in the fields by an enemy raid just before harvest. Your cattle, your most valuable assets, could be driven off in the night. Your home could be torched, your family scattered or enslaved. The centers of power themselves are often little more than fortified villas or newly established fortified towns, their earthwork ramparts and timber palisades a testament to the constant need for defense. These places offer a degree of refuge in times of attack, but they are also targets. Sieges, though perhaps not as elaborate as those of later medieval times, are a brutal reality, leading to starvation, disease, and often a massacre if the defenses are breached. This endless cycle of warfare is not just between Anglo-Saxons and Britons. It is just as common, and often just as savage, between the various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms themselves, and indeed among the rival British principalities. Loyalty is a fierce but often localized affair. The idea of a unified England or a unified Wales is still centuries in the future. Your primary concern is the survival of your own kin, your own village, under the protection of your immediate lord. The crowns these early kings wear are often forged in the heat of battle, made of wood and iron as much as any precious metal, and they rest uneasily on heads that know that a sharper sword or a more cunning rival could snatch them away at any moment. And you, the common subject, live and die under the shadow of these precarious, blood-stained crowns. And so, we stand at the notional end of our journey through the tumultuous, often terrifying, landscape of Dark Age Britain. You've walked in the shoes of those who saw Roman eagles depart, who faced the long knives of new settlers, who huddled in smoky timber halls, and who navigated a world of warring petty kings and shifting spiritual allegiances. We've explored the daily grind for sustenance, the perilous state of health, the harsh realities of womanhood, the warrior's brutal code, the fear of the untamed wild, the solace of fragile arts, and the slow, contested birth of new faiths and kingdoms. What, then, is the lasting echo of what life was really like in these shadowed centuries? It was, for you, the ordinary inhabitant, an age defined by profound insecurity. The comforting, if sometimes oppressive, order of Rome had shattered, leaving behind a power vacuum filled by ambitious warlords and relentless waves of newcomers. Your life was lived under the constant threat of violence, from raiders, from feuding neighbors, from the armies of rival chieftains or kings. The very land beneath your feet could shift allegiances, your village burned, your family scattered or enslaved, your future decided by the outcome of a brutal skirmish you had. No say it was an age of physical hardship. You toiled from dawn till dusk with rudimentary tools to wrest a meager living from often unyielding soil. Your home was a cramped, smoky, and frequently unhygienic timber hut or sunken dwelling, shared with your kin and sometimes your livestock. Your diet, as we've seen in another grim exploration, was monotonous, often insufficient, and a constant gamble against spoilage and contamination. Sickness was a frequent visitor, your body weakened by poor nutrition and harsh living conditions, with only folk remedies, superstition, and a desperate faith to see you through. An early death, from disease, injury, childbirth, or violence, was not a tragic exception, but a commonplace reality. The very landscape around you was different, wilder, more forested, less tamed than the Britain of Roman times or the high Middle Ages that followed. The great forests were sources of essential resources, but also places of fear, home to wolves, outlaws, and perhaps, in your mind, even more sinister supernatural entities. Travel between settlements was dangerous and difficult, the once proud Roman roads now decaying tracks, making communities more isolated, more reliant on their own resources. Your social world was circumscribed by the iron bonds of kinship and loyalty to your local lord. These ties offered a measure of protection and belonging, but they also came with heavy obligations, labor service, military duty, and the terrible burden of the blood feud if your kin were wronged. Justice was often rough and ready, a matter of oaths, ordeals, or the payment of guild. Its application heavily weighted by social status. The term Dark Ages itself, while often debated by historians, carries a certain truth from your perspective. It was a time when the grand imperial light of Rome had indeed been extinguished in Britain, leading to a decline in widespread literacy, in monumental stone architecture, in complex trade networks, and in centralized political order. But it was not an age devoid of human spirit, of creativity, or of the slow, painful forging of new identities and societies. Amidst the chaos, new kingdoms, Anglo-Saxon and much of what would become England, resilient British realms in the west and north were taking shape. New artistic styles flourished in metalwork and manuscript illumination. Epic poems and heroic tales were recited in mead halls, preserving history and cultural values. The Christian faith, in both its Celtic and Roman forms, provided spiritual solace for some and became a powerful force in reshaping the cultural and political landscape for you. Living through it, however, these larger historical processes were likely less apparent than the immediate, daily struggle for survival. Your horizon was probably limited to your own village, your own kin, your own lord. Your life was one of adaptation, of making do, of finding ways to endure in a world where stability was a fleeting dream and danger a constant companion. You were resilient, resourceful, bound by strong communal ties, but your existence was undeniably harsh, your comforts few, your security almost non-existent by any later standard. What it was really like was a life lived on the edge, a life stripped down to its bare essentials, a life where every sunrise was a small victory against the encroaching darkness. It was an age of iron and blood, of timber and thatch, of whispered prayers and warrior boasts, an age where the foundations of future nations were laid, often unknowingly, by ordinary people like you, enduring extraordinary hardships. The shadows were indeed long, and the dawn of a more ordered world was still many blood-soaked generations away. Good night.